And then there were two, the Dallas Mavericks, the Boston Celtics, from series predictions, player rankings, and of course, I guess team deep dives. We're going to do it all here on today's show as this is the NBA Finals preview. But of course, we just passed 18,000 subscribers, so thank you. But we're on the road to 20, and of course, we can't hit that milestone without your guys' support. So if you enjoy, all I ask for, drop a comment, I guess drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, drop a comment as well. Who do you have in the finals? And of course, let me know why if you'd like to do that as well. But that's enough yapping. Let's get into it. Kicking off here with just a brief series overview. Of course, in the first set of boxes, you see their start to now season record. Of course, regular season and postseason. Below that, strictly playoff record. Boston, of course, is 2-0 against Dallas this season. Both games, of course, took place in the regular season. And then you see their playoff offensive and defensive ratings. And the first note I'll throw out there is that this is a revenge series. Of course, we've heard all the noise about Kyrie Irving having it being a revenge series for him. Of course, he spent some time in Boston, didn't go as planned, but I think a revenge series that's going under the radar is Kristaps Porzingis. Of course, he was traded to Dallas, and he was supposed to be this Batman, or I guess 1A, 1B situation next to Luka Doncic. That didn't work out, and they kind of sent him to Washington after it didn't work out for his career to essentially die. But he's kept himself relevant and he's back in a title contention situation. I think that revenge situation is going under the radar, but we'll dive into those here in just a moment. But if you want to take a quick look here at the overall lineups, of course, on the left side, Boston, right side, Dallas. I think you guys could pick that up. Green means, of course, positional advantage as far as player-to-player perspective. I understand these aren't going to be the matchups, but you guys get the picture. And then, of course, red for Luka, best player in the series. Now, if we had to talk about bench, especially if Kristaps is back and he's starting from day one for the Boston Celtics, you then have Horford back on the bench with Peyton Pritchard. Boston would definitely have the better bench advantage as well here going into these NBA Finals. But let's start with Boston's path. I want to start with Boston's path, talk about Dallas, dive into Luka, of course, and then maybe the face of the league talk before we get into our predictions. So if you want, of course, there should be some timestamps. If not, just skip throughout the video. You'll see my predictions eventually. But let me start by saying this for Boston. It is not the Boston Celtics' fault that they've ran into some banged up teams, some injured stars along the way. Sure, has it been a rather fortunate path going to the NBA Finals? Yes, obviously. But you can't control who's in front of you. All you can control is taking care of business and winning basketball games. Boston has done their job so far. And outside of maybe the Miami Heat, I mean, hey, who's to say that any of the teams they've lined up with so far have had a legitimate chance of beating them in a 7-game series? I mean, sure, Indiana maybe grabs a couple games. Cleveland, I guess they grabbed a game or two. Maybe they grab an extra one if Jarrett Allen and Donovan Mitchell are playing. I don't legitimately see any of the teams they've ran into beating them in a 7-game series. So they've done their job to this point. But quickly to recap, in round one, like I mentioned, they faced the Miami Heat. No Jimmy Butler, but you can't control that. He went down in the play-in, so he wasn't even available for the second play-in game. So you play a team with Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero at the helm or at the head of that snake, right? And this is the Boston team that lost the game in this series, game 2. But they shouldn't have lost that game. If I'm not mistaken, it was game 2 or game 3. But Boston has this history in this Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown era where even if they're the so much better team, top to bottom, depth-wise, star power-wise, whatever it is, they play down to their competition. And they did exactly that here against the Miami Heat and Spo and, of course, Bam Adebayo. They ended up grabbing a game, extending it to 5 games. But other than that one game, Boston dominated round 1. When we dive into round 2, as a Cavs fan, it was not really much of a series. Boston won in 5 games. There was no Jarrett Allen, I will say, in our Cavs defense, and no Donovan Mitchell for the latter half of that series either. But on the flip side, no Kristaps Porzingis for the Boston Celtics. Now, Kristaps' impact on his team isn't the same as Jarrett Allen, and of course Donovan Mitchell's impact for the Cavaliers, but it's still star for star, right? But again, the Cavs didn't stand much of a chance if Donovan Mitchell wasn't dropping 45. Darius Garland's not ready for prime time. That has nothing to do with the Boston Celtics, though. They dominated from start to finish, and aside from Donovan Mitchell's one legacy game, the Boston Celtics took care of business, and that was essentially their last loss here in the postseason to this point. Then they go on to the Eastern Conference Finals against a team that at one point in the season had the number one offense of all time, the Indiana Pacers. And of course, a team that had the number one offense, and then they traded for Pascal Siakam. And they've been fun this postseason run, let's just say that. But even when the Pacers were fully healthy game one, of course, Tyrese went on to get hurt and of course, missed basically every game of the series. But even in game one, when this team was fully healthy, their star showed out, right? So the Pacers, they were fully healthy. Their star showed out. They had a great game. They still lost in game one to Boston. Of course, Jaylen Brown hit that amazing shot to send it to overtime, and Jayson Tatum closed the deal there in the extra period. But again, I know Tyrese missed almost every game in the series, but I still don't think, at the very most, what? They grabbed 2 games, extended to 6, maybe 7. But overall, I can't see Boston losing this series. Even with the injured stars of Indiana, Boston overall dominated with the fortunate injuries on Indiana's half. And of course, they advanced to the NBA Finals. They're going to their second finals in 3 years. Of course, a couple years back, didn't go as planned. Of course, same core of players now with Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday, but same core of players. You went to the finals against Steph Curry, and of course, they just abused the drop coverage of a guy like Al Horford. But to me, this is no doubt the scariest overall unit that Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum have had in their Boston Celtics days. From Tatum and Brown being the star players, they're leading the ship, and they're looking to get their first, I guess, Lombardi trophy. Not Lombardi, excuse me. Larry O'Brien trophy, right? Hey, so you have your star players, and then you have your savvy veterans, guys like Derek White, of course, Al Horford. These guys have been there before, but now they're looking to get over the hump finally. And then you still have your champion, to lead the snake, a guy like Jrue Holiday. So if this team gets rattled at any point, which I don't see happening, Jrue Holiday could be their champion, their leader, to say, hey, let's get back on the right track. I'll say this. The only other guy, the only key player on this Boston Celtics team that hasn't been here on this stage, especially even to the second round of the playoffs, is a guy like Kristaps Porzingis. And that's a guy that is 7 foot. He can shoot lights out from 3, and he can win you any game with his shooting and offensive ability, even defensive ability. A guy like Kristaps Porzingis. He's the only guy that hasn't been on this stage yet. But when we really look into it, he's going to come into this series probably with more chips on his shoulder than some other veterans in this series. He's going to want to beat his old team, right? The team that traded him. He's going to want to go and prove to them, you need me. And he's going to want to prove to the Celtics, you couldn't have won this playoffs. You could have won this finals without me. So he's going into this series proving his worth, I guess, on an individual scale. But then, when you play an old team like Dallas, of course, you always want to beat your old team. And of course, that team essentially chose Luka over Kristaps, which was the right decision. But Kristaps was frustrated his whole time there in Dallas. He felt like he never had a fair opportunity to be himself. And now he's in a situation where he's not the lead guy, but he can go out there and spoil his former team's chance at a championship. So he's going to come in with a chip on his shoulder. This Boston team from top down, they have everything. They have the star power, the depth, the defense, and of course the chips on their shoulder coming out here to try and prove something. So Boston, it's scary. And this is the last thing I'll say so I don't spoil my prediction. But if this Boston team can't get the job done, it's going to be shocking. It's going to be shocking because we haven't even seen this team fully lock in against a tough opponent for a full 7-game series. And especially if they come into this series and they make Luka work on defense, because he's already going to have to carry the offensive load. If he comes into this series and Boston just continues to put him in actions, put him in pick and rolls, make him be a defender as well as carry the offensive load for Dallas, Boston's going to be scary. I can't see, it's very unlikely that Boston loses this series, but we'll talk about my prediction in just a moment. On the flip side, let's talk about the underdog in this series. And of course, I guess according to the betting odds, this is the biggest underdog we've seen in the NBA Finals since the 2016 Cleveland Cavaliers. Of course, I have a Kyrie bobblehead right behind me. We all know how that series ended. One of the greatest years in professional sports history, but especially in basketball, of course. But neither here nor there. Let's talk about Dallas's path, right? They come in as a big underdog. And we'll talk about Luka's excellence and his career as an underdog here in just a moment. But in round 1, you play the LA Clippers. Kawhi did miss a couple games, right? So we want to throw that out there. But if James Harden didn't have a throwback performance or two, and if Paul George didn't have that one crazy game where it felt like he didn't miss, the Dallas Mavericks eventually just overall controlled this series. And if Luka wins the finals, what's a better stepping stone for a guy like Luka Doncic on his path to the NBA Finals than beating a team like the Clippers, which that's what he's known for in the playoffs, is beating and having great performances against the Clippers. So what a great stepping stone on your journey to a Larry O'Brien. I got it right that time. Second round, you play the Oklahoma City Thunder, the youngest number one seed in NBA history, but don't be mistaken, they deserve that number one seed. And the Thunder came out firing, all right? They had a big game one victory. And it looked like they figured out the Dallas Mavericks. Luka was banged up at the time. And Shea and that crew, I mean, they from start to finish, they did have a great overall series, but the Mavericks ended up stealing game two at home, and they just controlled home court since that point, and they eventually just closed the deal against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Big shot after big shot from a guy like Kyrie Irving, and of course, Luka Doncic. They got the job done in six. So you go to the Western Conference Finals. You're playing another top three seed in the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that had taken down the star-studded Suns and the defending champs in back-to-back rounds. And if Jokic wasn't Jokic, they would have taken care of both of those teams in 5 to 6 games. So you go to the Western Conference Finals, and you're playing that Timberwolves team, a team that's loaded top to bottom, and they have that star player, a guy that at this point before the series, some people were saying is a young Michael Jordan. Regardless, 5 very close games, but the Kyrie and Luka duo continue to show out late in those games, even though they were down late multiple times, and they closed it out in 5. Again, they have 2 guys, 2 legitimate guys that they could go to down the stretch, and those guys continue to hit clutch shot after clutch shot. They closed the deal, and this Dallas team now goes to the NBA Finals for the 3rd time in franchise history. Of course, the first time, back in 2006, they lost to the Miami Heat. And then the second time in 2011, they beat the Miami Heat. This time, it's not a rubber match with the Miami Heat, but a team that the Miami Heat have a lot of, history with in the Boston Celtics. The 3rd finals appearance for the Dallas Mavericks, the 23rd for the Boston Celtics. And of course, this is a duo from the Mavericks side of things that is looking to they have something to prove, right? And that's what I'm getting at here. Again, Kyrie, it's a revenge series. But let's talk about Luka here. I think we often just say, hey, Luka's a great player. Jason Tatum's a great player and Kyrie's a great player. But I don't think we really grasp the greatness that's in front of us at times here as NBA fans or NFL fans, really just as sports fans, because we are all prisoners of the moment. We don't take time to often reflect on players' careers until it's all said and done. I don't like to do that. Let's talk about these players when they're in front of us, because whether if you like them, you love them, you hate them, you have to respect them. And Luka's one of those players that he's on the trajectory. I'm not making this prediction, but he's on the trajectory to being the greatest player of all time at this point in time, of course. And if he gets this finals victory, just like Jokic last year, these are guys that are on that trajectory. So let's dive into Luka's career really quickly. And of course, just again, even if you're a Celtics fan, let's respect the greatness of Luka Doncic. 25 years old at this point in his career. He's a superstar, and that is no question about it. He already has more first-team All-NBA selections than Hall of Famers, first ballot guys, all-time greats, All-NBA 75 members, guys like Steph Curry, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Garnett, and even the reigning MVP, and a guy like Nikola Jokic. That list goes on and on, of course. This is a guy that's been a lock for the first-team All-NBA since practically his second season in the NBA. Again, 6 seasons. He's already had 5 first-team All-NBA selections. We've never seen anything like that. He currently leads the playoffs as an individual in these categories. Total points, rebounds, assists, steals, field goals made, three-pointers made, free throws made, and overall minutes. On this playoff run, he has already beaten 3 of the top 4 seeds in the Western Conference this year alone, and now he plays the best team in the entire NBA. If he can get that done, I don't know if there's a better playoff run from an individual aspect. But wait, it does get better. Throughout his playoff history, he's done nothing but exceed expectations. He's been the underdog in every single playoff series of his career so far, and that doesn't change here against the Boston Celtics. He's been the road team in every single series of his playoff career but one. I guess that's not really a flex, but you guys get it. He's had this playoff success with being the road team in pretty much every single series he's been in. But in every one of those series that he's been in so far, except round one this year against the Clippers, he has played a top 9 defense. Again, that doesn't change here against the Boston Celtics. His playoff numbers have been so crazy in his career from an individual aspect that this past Western Conference Final Series, where he averaged 34, 9, and 8, some would argue that was maybe his worst individual series of his career. You could even make the argument that his series against the Thunder, where he was averaging 24, 9, and 8, that might have been his worst playoff individual series of his career. Those are legendary numbers for some players, and that's a bad series, quote unquote, for a guy like Luka Doncic. He's going into not only a huge series for this franchise, going into the third NBA Finals ever, but he's going into a legacy-defining series here against the Boston Celtics. If he goes into this series against the Celtics as a underdog, right, as an undermanned team, and you win this series, look, I'm not. He would still have to do some damage. He'd still have to score a lot of points, do a lot of statistical greatness. He still has to win some MVPs. But if he can get this finals this year, he is on the trajectory to being the greatest player to ever lace them up. And that's no exaggeration. But Luka Doncic is definitely on a path. And again, whether if you love him, you hate him, you have to respect him. He's been a fun to watch here early on in his career. But then we want to talk about the face of the league. We've had this question thrown out a lot, really sparked by the question, or it's really been sparked by the emergence of a guy like Anthony Edwards. Again, American-born player, being the face of the league is definitely something that looked like it was in his grasp. But now we have the question of, does this finals really, I guess, solidify who the next face of the league is after LeBron and Steph are out the league? Because you have to be, again, marketable, right? You have to be likable, right? For the most part, a guy like LeBron, you do all the right things off the court. You have to kind of continue that trend here, doing all the right things off the court. You have to be marketable, and you have to be a great basketball player. Those are all the key components to being the face of the league, quote unquote, whatever sports league you're in, right? And now it comes down to, do you want to have an American-born player, a guy like Jayson Tatum, leader of one of the most historic and decorated franchises ever? If he can win his first finals, is he the face of the league? Again, he can relate to a lot more Americans, which the NBA is an American sport. Or is it going to be a foreign player like Luka Doncic? I don't think we've ever been able to say a foreign-born player has been the face of the league. But Luka's likable. Of course, he's an amazing player, like we just talked about, on the trajectory of the greatest player of all time if he can get this finals win. I can't see it being a foreign-born player, but from a player aspect, man, I would love for it to be Luka, right? Because Luka, again, is likable. But you also have foreign-born players that are very likable, like Giannis, who we talked about as being the face of the league when he won it. Or Nikola Jokic last year when he won it. We talked about him being maybe the face of the league. But again, I think Americans are always going to resort towards the American player. But interesting to see if the Celtics do get this job done with a way better team. If Jayson Tatum gets the job done, are we going to consider him being the next face of the league? I know a lot of people, more people hate him than love him here across the NBA fan bases. So interesting to see. But face of the league, I don't believe it's either of these two guys. I would probably have to lead probably the field if I had to bank on anything. But again, a lot of foreign-born players are so talented in this league. Luka, Wemby, Jokic, Giannis. I think those guys have a better chance, maybe more so than Jayson Tatum, to be the face of the league. But again, that's a different story for a different day. I just want to throw it out there, put it in your guys' mind. Do you believe the face of the league can be determined by who wins this NBA Finals? Again, I'm going to take the field. But let's get into my predictions here. Again, we see the tail of the tape as far as overall record, playoff record, the season series, of course, and the playoff offensive and defensive ratings. Again, like I mentioned early in the episode, for Boston on their path to this NBA Finals, this is a Boston team that their key in this series, their X factors, Kristaps Porzingis, his dominance and how great and how quickly he can bounce back from his injury. But as far as on-court schematics, if we want to talk X's and O's, this is a team that I think is going to have to dominate. Yeah, I think, just even as far as the media, this is a team that is so talented top to bottom. But if they go into this final series and they just dominate, they wipe the floor with Dallas, they beat them in 5, I think we're going to look back and say this was one of the most dominant and complete basketball teams we've ever seen, especially in the Boston Celtics franchise. But if, let's say, this series does go on longer, this is a team that I think people are going to look at like, oh, they weren't the greatest team. They didn't live up to their expectations because they only beat Dallas in 7 games. This is a Boston team that I'm expecting to come out here and for their legacies and just for how the media looks at them. Again, that's not the end all be all, but hear me out. I think Boston with this team and their star players, they have to dominate. They have to dominate. But in order to do that, I think you're going to have to make Luka have the oxygen tank of a superhero. Because I think if you're Boston, you go into this series and you say, okay, we're going to make Derrick Jones Jr. beat us. Even to a degree, we're going to make PJ Washington beat us. We're going to make them knock down 6 threes each, and we're just going to solely focus in on Luka and Kyrie Irving. But more so when we talk about Luka Doncic, this is a guy where we're going to have to get him involved on every offensive action. We're going to have to put him in every single pick and roll, set some back screens on him, make him move defensively. There's been so many times in this postseason, whether if it was in the Thunder series or the Timberwolves series, where Luka just was sitting on a corner sitter, a guy like Jaden McDaniels. Luka was sitting on a guy like Josh Giddey, right, for parts of that Thunder series. And he was able to rest. He was able to rest on the defensive side of the ball. And when it came to offense, of course, Luka is Luka Doncic. He was able to be his magical self on that side of the floor, carrying this team all the way to the NBA Finals. But if you're Boston, you can't let him sit. And of course, unless Dallas is going to go and say, hey, we're going to put Luka on Kristaps Porzingis, or we're going to put Luka on Al Horford. I guess that's interesting, right? That's an interesting counter from the Dallas Mavericks because those guys, even though they're big men, they're stronger than Luka, but Luka can hold his own, I would say, most times on those bigger bodies. But if you're Dallas, you got to have Luka continue to be involved in every single action, tire him out, and force him to rely on some of these role players offensively to have a big series. And again, if you go home and say, we lost to Derrick Jones Jr., I think you take that over we let Luka just run rampage on us and do whatever he wanted to do. And of course, you're going to rather say, hey, we're going to make these role players beat us. So that if you're Boston, to me, that's the key. Make the role players beat you. If you're Dallas, you just got to hope that Boston doesn't take that approach. if you can go into this series, Kyrie, of course, is going to be impactful offensively and defensively. But for Dallas, the X factor is these role players, right? You need Derrick Jones to knock down some shots. You need PJ to play like he did in that Thunder series. You need these role players to knock down the shots and be impactful and play great defense. That is the key to this series because we know Luka is going to be Luka Doncic. He's going to get you a 25-point triple-double average in this series. For Kyrie Irving, we need to see that offensive aggressiveness like we saw in that Timberwolves series. We need to see him be aggressive against his old team. You know he has something to prove. We need that aggressive 2016 version of Kyrie Irving, right? Luka Doncic, we got to just kind of hope that they let you sit in the corners and guard Derek White when he's sitting in the corners. Or, again, one of the big men there on the Boston side of things. But if Boston does make Luka Doncic work, again, we need those role players and we need Kyrie Irving to come out and have an amazing series. But with all of that in mind, Boston, of course, home team in this series. They are by far the better team top to bottom as far as star talent-wise and depth-wise. How's that going to play a factor? You can argue Boston has the better coach as well. I just can't go with it. Right before the season, of course, late October, I came out here right before the season, and in my preseason prediction video, I said the Dallas Mavericks were going to win the NBA Finals. And that was, of course, I said in that video as well, I said that the Dallas Mavericks, they just need a couple big men. They just need a couple solid, bigger wings. And of course, this team has a legitimate chance to win it all. You could fact check it, right? It's over on my TikTok if you don't want to search through all my videos because we post a lot. Go over to my TikTok. Same handle. It's on my TikTok. You can find the exact video. I said the Dallas Mavericks were going to win the NBA Finals before the season. I also said that if I was legal at the time, I would have bet on it, right? But of course, I wasn't legal at the time. 21 now, of course, that has anything to do with it. Dallas Mavericks, though, I'm going to stick with my preseason prediction. And really my rationale here is that I know Luka Doncic is going to be tired. He's going to have to work every single possession in the series, and that makes it scary as a Dallas believer going into the series. However, when it comes to clutch time, I just trust Luka and Kyrie far more than I trust a duo like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown Now, that doesn't mean that, I mean, hey, nobody's going to be able to guard Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown here. I guess shut him down here in this Dallas series. But I just trust the duo of Dallas more. And of course, my ego gets in the way. I picked this team before the series, and I'm going to stick with them. All right. That's really my rationale here. But of course, finals MVP, it's going to have to be Luka Doncic. He's going to have to be Superman. He's going to have to play 40 plus minutes a game. And he's just going to have to carry this Mavericks team like he has for the last 5 years, it seems like, to the promised land. And I'm going to stick again with my preseason prediction. But it's definitely a hard, and it's definitely I can't find the analogy I'm thinking of here, but like if I had to bet on it, if I had to bet my house on this game, I'm betting the Boston Celtics or this series, right? But I I would rather see the Dallas Mavericks win the series. Again, I'm struggling to find that analogy, but hopefully you guys can see it's like a heart and mind situation, right? But regardless, Dallas in 6 is my prediction. You close it out at home. Now 7 would be cinematic, right? Kyrie, of course, stepped on lucky. Boston's, of course, logo. What would that be? Going on the road, game 7, Kyrie would close it out there against his former team. Something to look out for. But I'll say Dallas in 6, close it out at home in front of your home fans. That's just always a better feeling rather than doing it on the road. But the last thing I want to do here before we get out of here, and this will be quick, I just want to go through the top 10 players going into this series. Just gives us a brief overview of how the talent stacks up here on an individual player aspect, how the talent stacks up across both teams. Who has the better players, right? The honorable mention, and I guess at number 10, it's either you could put Derek Lively here, right? Derek Lively and or Daniel Gafford. I'm okay with either of them, but again, one of them has to be an honorable mention. At number 9, though, we're going to go with Al Horford, proven veteran. This is his last dance, more likely than not. A lot of people aren't talking about that, but I think if Boston wins the finals, Al Horford's probably going to hang it up. So, of course, he's going to be a Hall of Fame level player here to end off his career. And what a better way to go out than getting a Larry O'Brien. And number 8, PJ Washington, of course, he's going to be pivotal. If we were talking about impact in this series, he's going to be top 5. Because he's going to have to guard Tatum and Brown on every single possession. And not only that, he's going to have to knock down some shots offensively. From an impact perspective, PJ's going to have an amazing season. And I'm just glad he's known more so now for on-court play than what was happening with his off-the-court life. But PJ Washington, amazing player, and he's going to have to be that here in the NBA Finals. At number 7, we have Derek White, of course, a guy that has came out of nowhere. And for stretches of that first-round series against Miami, Derek White was their best player. What do you have, like a 35 or 40-point performance? Just he couldn't miss in that first round, and that carried over into that second round against the Cleveland Cavaliers. But Derek White, great two-way player, and he's going to have his hands full this series, whether it's with Luka or Kyrie Irving. At number 6, this could have been Jrue Holiday, right? But Kristaps coming off an injury, hasn't done much in this postseason run. The Latvian big man, right? Of course, we know the impact he can have when he's healthy, but big series for him individually. He wants to prove his worth, like I mentioned, to the Celtics and to the Dallas Mavericks for of course, letting him go all those years back. Moving into the top 5, Jrue Holiday, talking about having your hands full. You're going to have to guard Luka Doncic from the start of the series to the end of it. Of course, if you guys, unless it's a big blowout, but I can't see that happening. And Jrue Holiday is going to have to be the All-NBA defender, the Defensive Player of the Year candidate that we know he can be this entire series, whether he's guarding Luka, which there's no stopping him, but you can minimize him. And of course, Kyrie Irving, we know what he could turn into. Just, again, proven champion, Hall of Fame level player. Moving into the top 3, we have a tie here at 3A and 3B. All just depends on your preference of two-way ability. I love two-way ability, but at the same time, Kyrie is a top 5 player of all time for me. I'll get favorite player of all time. I should have thrown that word in there. That's very key. Hopefully that doesn't get clipped out. But Kyrie, of course, he's bringing that defensive effort now, and that's the reason why I have him tied here with Jaylen Brown. He's been on the stage before, right? He knows what he needs to do, and he's going to have a big series, again, against such a talented and deep roster like the Boston Celtics do have. Jaylen Brown, on the other hand, has that two-way ability. At times, like we saw in the Eastern Conference Finals, can be the Boston Celtics' best player. And of course, overall, he's a top 15, top 20 level player in the entire association. He's right there with Kyrie Irving. That was my preseason rankings. And of course, that stands here going into the finals. And number 2, Jason Tatum, of course, best player overall on the Boston Celtics. Now, if he doesn't show up for this final series, well, we got to start having a serious conversation about where he stands across the NBA, because this will be the second NBA Finals where he doesn't show up. A couple years back, it was against Steph Curry and the Warriors. Didn't have the greatest series. This series, it's a big series for Jayson Tatum as far as his legacy. If he wants to live up to these Kobe Bryant aspirations that he sets out for himself, he's going to have to eventually step up on the biggest stage. And this is a great way to start, to get back on track for your legacy, being the best player in the Celtics. Personally, I'm not a Tatum fan, but I want him to come out and dominate if Boston's going to win and just be the best player, head and shoulders above everybody in this series. Prove why the hype is around you. And then number one, Luka Doncic, of course, there's no question about this one. He is the best player in the series, arguably in the entire NBA, up there with Nikola Jokic, and of course, to me, still Giannis Antetokounmpo, as long as he is healthy. But of course, on the left side, there's a lot of green and a lot of blue, so again, it might strain your eyes. But of course, here on the left side, your top 5 players. On the right side, of course, you have your 6 through 10, and a guy like Dereck Lively definitely has an argument to be on this list as well. But that is it. That is it. Of course, I ran through a brief overview. We talked about some X's and O's, some player breakdowns, some team paths, and of course, I gave you guys my series predictions as a whole. But episode 179, we're on the road to 20,000 subscribers. So if you enjoyed, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Of course, in the comments, let me know who you have in the NBA Finals. But tomorrow, we have a 12-team full PPR mock here as, of course, we continue our fantasy football journey here early in the offseason. And then Thursday, we have some AFC South predictions. Amir might be there. He might not be there. Of course, he's kind of wishy-washy at this point in time. But regardless, I'll be there. And we'll be breaking down all of the teams in the AFC South, giving you my record predictions. Until tomorrow, if you enjoyed, of course, we'll see you tomorrow.